acted very, very dangerous.
Get these spidey sense, I was like, oh, something's off.
And I'm just like, man, I'm waiting to hear something,
Keep that crowd warmed up. Is Mr. Yahola Tiger.
What's going on, guys, and welcome to the 22nd episode? Yeah, 22nd episode of the War Cry podcast. I'm your host, Yahola Tiger. Kind of delayed this episode a little bit. Life happens, but you guys got a little dose of me on, and I wanted to say I appreciated Matt from the Bigfoot Crossroads podcast. I was on his podcast, and I appreciate him having me on. That was awesome, just to kind of almost do like an intro type of episode where like I'm just telling you basically who I am and what I do. And for those who listen to Bigfoot Crossroads podcast, and on YouTube, I appreciate you guys coming over here and listening to me. I know I had a few people let me know in the comments of different posts and just letting me know that they listen and they're going to subscribe and listen and follow. So I appreciate you guys. If this is your first episode hearing me, or if this is your 22nd episode of hearing me, I appreciate you coming over here and checking me out and seeing what I got. And a lot of my inspiration for this podcast comes from storytelling days back. Just hearing elders tell stories and also just hearing, like I said, different podcasts like Bigfoot Crossroads and many of other podcasts. But I appreciate you guys listening in. And, since, been on that podcast, I've almost got like 1,000 audio listens to the podcast, which is kind of wild because I haven't posted in like 7 or 8, maybe even 10 days. So I appreciate you guys, like I said, once again, and let's get on with this show. So the topic today, as you guys, when you guys view the episode and you say, oh, the title of the episode. So today I'm going to be talking about Charles Manson and his connection with JFK. I know there's going to be some people be like, dang, okay. Got a little juice on this one. But so I had heard this kind of connection, I want to say about I'd say probably 3 or 4 years ago. There was a guy named, I think his name was Tom O'Brien. And he had a book that came out that was that had basically kind of like a connection between Manson and JFK. Geez, I'm losing my train of thought here. Dang, as I'm sitting here, I'm actually kind of thinking his name is Tom O'Neill. I apologize. So Tom O'Neill. So he came out with this book, and it was called Chaos. Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. And this book was actually kind of highlighted on Joe Rogan's podcast. And I had caught that, kind of deep diving into some conspiracies. You guys, guys know I get into those things. And I kind of found his book, and then I listened to that podcast with Joe Rogan, and I just thought it was so crazy that, like, all these things could be connected. And one thing that about this, and kind of giving a little backstory. Manson, obviously he murdered Sharon Tate and a few other people. Back in the 60s, and so one thing I was trying not to do was trying to and that's one thing I try to do with all these podcasts is give props or anybody to people that killed people. It's kind of hard on that, especially with that the podcast with the Oklahoma Girl Scouts. I was trying really, really hard not to give credit to people murder type thing. So, but Charles Manson, obviously, like I said, he was co-leader and he was the killer of Sharon Tate in 1968. And one thing that kind of got me thinking in 2019 that Quentin Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I was like, dang, they kind of rewrote history, kind of a different way. But, in that same time frame, that book come out, the Chaos, Charles Manson, CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. And, Tom O'Neill, he did a lot of research. Like, he spent 20, I think even 30 years about, trying to get all this information. And how this starts is, Manson, obviously being a young kid, growing up he basically born in 34. And from that time when he was born in 34 till he was 18, there was a lot of like kind of redacted or kind of not really given the full story. But basically he had ended up in a few juvenile detention centers. And, he ends up all over the place. I think he was born in Ohio. Then he was sent to some type of boarding school in Virginia. And, there was all just kind of weird, things going on when it comes to him. And, he had been to hospital. And one thing too, he had kind of been, he'd been kind of doing petty crimes. But, till we get to like 1967, and he was 32 at the time. And, he had been paroled from Terminal Island Prison, and he basically made his way up north to San Francisco, kind of also to Bay Area type place. And this is where his kind of life took a weird kind of place. So in San Francisco, the doctor that alleged, now this is, some of this stuff is kind of alleged, and you kind of have to connect the dots even harder. But there was a doctor named Jolly West, and his full name was like Louis West or Louise West, and he was an American psychiatrist who was involved in a myriad of different type of psychiatric type of things. I believe he even was in Oklahoma, and he was like the chair or the dean of the psychiatric college there, which is kind of wild to kind of tie that into being from Oklahoma and finding out that like, dang, he's kind of wilding out. Like, he was kind of doing some under the radar type testing on people. But so he was the chair of psychiatry at the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine. And then from 1969 to 1989, he served as the chair of psychiatry at the University of Cal, and then the Los Angeles School of Medicine. And then also he went on to basically do neuropsychiatry. So I am butchering, but he ended up being at UCLA Institute of, I guess, neuropsychiatry. But what he did, and a lot of the things that he, was really trying to learn, was the practicing of brainwashing. And one thing that kind of a crazy case that I had come across, but there was a guy, his name was like Shraver, but he was a corporal, and he basically, assaulted this woman, or I think it was a woman, but he basically assaulted somebody. And Jolly West was trying to basically exonerate him. And that was kind of what he would do, is like he would do techniques to try to get servicemen that were like under the suspicion of like treason or false confessions. And this is all during like kind of the Korean War time. But Shraver was one of the big ones that he did. And basically he kind of put him under some type of truth serum of some sorts, and I can't think of the name of the truth serum. And he basically would, people tell the truth, and he ended up telling the truth of kind of the serviceman, what he did to this person. And so, one thing that he was really known for, and kind of that was what he was known for, but what he also kind of was trying to do was like some like creation of cults and management of cults. And he was real big into anti-death penalty activism. And, he was real big into the civil rights. He also, participated in sit-ins and rallies. And, he was a trustee of the American Psychiatric Association. Dude. So, guys, that was Lord Oscar, first of his name. He had to let it, he had to make sure he was known. But sorry, that was my cat, if you hear that in the background. But but like I said, that's kind of what he was known for. Well, Jolly West, allegedly. Now he never said that he did, but so he ends up making his way to Cornell, and he completed his residency there, and from what I've read is that it was that's where MK Ultra was kind of created. If you guys have heard of MK Ultra, it's basically making people do things when they don't, without their consent, and basically making them suggestible to anything. And it puts them in these states and where they basically do whatever you need them to do, and it's kind of crazy. But that's how he kind of began his time with the CIA, and this is where the CIA comes in. Now, you got the backstory on Jolly West or Louis West. Now comes in Manson. So that's where he kind of, there was a hospital or some type of urgent care type facility in San Francisco, and Manson was frequenting that San Francisco hospital. Well, the CIA obviously it's CIA funded this hospital, and it's basically drug research. And we know for a fact that in documents that have been released that his participation in 2 of them have been confirmed. So Manson was confirmed going to 2 different CIA funded drug research studies. Another kind of crazy thing that connects the CIA, Jolly West, Manson, is that Manson's parole officer was basically a Berkeley doctoral student named Roger Smith, and he was part of a federally funded program researching LSD and drugs amongst the San Francisco population. And his position as a parole officer allowed Smith to provide elements of immunity to some of these research subjects, which being Manson. So although he had the power to send Manson back to prison for Manson doing all this wild stuff, but he would basically Manson would go to Mexico and work and do all types of wild stuff and then come back. Well, that was violating his parole, and he had all types of stuff, and Manson still remained free, and he was still hooked on LSD and drugs. Well, Roger Smith also had a tenure at Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic, which allowed him to basically collaborate with pharmacology type stuff. And basically, Dave Smith is who he kind of runs into and who's the founder of the clinic. But that's one thing that's so crazy is all these people are connected to all, basically our own government. And I'm getting kind of spicy with some of this information. Like I said, I had to, I've read multiple articles on this and, listened to podcasts and read part of Chaos. But man, this dicey. I may not put this up on YouTube, guys. I'm going to be 100% with you on that. This may be a podcast only, but basically, in exchange for the federal funding, courtesy of the CIA, the pair basically researched recreational drugs amongst their patients, and they, began to recognize that the frequency, presence of runaways or addicts who belonged to Manson's cults were showing up at these clinics, and the Manson family compound, kind of where he was using drugs and participating in bizarre, kind of weird, strange, sexual rites, was happening. And after 4 months of the kind of a crazy research, Rose returned to San Francisco. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Alan Rose. So he was an assistant. And so he was in, Alan Rose was in the family, the Manson cult. And he would report back. And so they both, so in 1970, Alan Rose and David Smith, who was the founder of this clinic, wrote a scholarly study on the Manson family, and the group of the group marriage commune, a case study, where they basically wrote up some type of paper, essentially, a case study on the Manson family and kind of what they do when a lot of people live together. And it's just kind of strange. So this brings back in Jolly West. And he did run, like I said, studies on LSD and drugs amongst hippies. And that was one of his, kind of as he was, kind of doctoring Manson, helping Manson. And he, like I said, he's a CIA guy with a background in deprogramming victims and brainwashing. And so, this hospital ended up being kind of like a fake hippie crash pad. And sometimes what they would do is they would kind of just, bring people in and just get them, all kind of hyped up on LSD and see what they would do. And they would do all types of, crazy stuff. And so that's one thing about this topic. It's just, it's a lot of information, and I'm trying to kind of, not over information people. You may have to listen to it a second time, but there's just so many different aspects of these different government agents or government entities who just they're connected, and they're all, and that's one thing that conspiracy theorists, people are always like, oh, you always say everything's connected, but I just gave you multiple people and multiple different facets that, they're connected, and they're connected by us, our government. I say us, but our government. And so I mentioned these this hippie crash pads, they were using them as a brothel, and so they would basically test, and this is part of MK Ultra, but they would basically test Johns, guys who would just come in for the sex, and they would just dose them up and see how they would react. Well, in 1973, they officially terminated MK Ultra, the program. Well, Tom O'Neill believes that that program later, formed under a different name and kept going. Now, a lot of the documents of MK Ultra and that program have, they're all super redacted, and you have to basically read between the lines, and it's just, he ended up getting that document for that, and there's nothing to it but just redacted. So, Manson in late 60s, he ditched San Francisco, and he went to LA. A year later, his madness worsened as basically the CIA kept, intervening in his life, and it came to that tragic fruition, and in his book, in Tom O'Neill's book, he uncovered evidence that, LA area law enforcement investigators mishandled a lot of aspects of the Manson case. And he also did, Tom O'Neill also did claim that, LAPD was destroying records from a 1969 homicide investigation. Now, this is where it comes into Vincent Bulli, and I'm having a hard time saying his name, Bugliosi. He was a prosecutor in the Manson family trial, but he also, wrote the book Helter Skelter, and his book established a definitive, a very, it basically created the narrative of those murders. And it did, in his book, it did exclude the CIA's role in the LSD research and all that stuff. But one thing that in Tom O'Neill's book, he goes into big depth about Bugliosi having all these ties with the CIA, but also too he was kind of crazy. He was had his wife followed for years, and he just had all types of wild stuff. In his previous past, he was, in his previous stuff, he had different verdicts overturned, and it was just crazy, man. I don't know how the 60s, and I don't know how they I'm trying to be not be crazy about this, but the 60s to me just is like it's just the craziest time. Like, there's no internet, there's no phones, like, you can't, like, you can't video record someone. Like, there was all types of wild stuff going on, and Bugliosi was a part of that. And so basically in Tom O'Neill's book, Stephen Kay, who was a co-prosecutor for the Manson murder trial with Bugliosi, told O'Neill that the uncovered evidence in chaos could overturn the original verdicts, and that's kind of wild. I would definitely have I definitely would read that book if you guys haven't. Tom, like, if you want to listen to his interview with Joe Rogan, that's another, like I said, that's a great book, and it is pretty factual. He doesn't take any leaps or doesn't connect any dots, but this is how Manson is connected to JFK. So we all know, JFK was assassinated or allegedly was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, Oswald was then assassinated by Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was taken into custody, and they said that he was in, and this is from multiple sources and multiple cops, and this is also in Tom O'Neill's book too as well, that multiple of those deputies and sheriff's deputies and everybody that was that was in on the arrest of Jack Ruby said that he was normal. He didn't really kind of know what was going on, and basically Jolly West comes in and treats Jack Ruby, and they said when Jack Ruby when Jolly West got out of the cell, Jack Ruby lost his mind. Like, he was losing his absolute mind. And so I just find that to be so interesting. And do we know what happened in there? Not really. But we'll never know, because both of those guys were ended up gone. That's one thing that's like kind of crazy. But like, basically he went nuts and then had a pulmonary embolism and then died. And he died in the same facility as Oswald and Kennedy. So what's kind of crazy about that, is that West is involved in that JFK situation and the Warren Commission. So that's a little bit of, like I said, that's a little heat, man. That's kind of crazy. But I heard that, I could not believe it. I was like, man, that's wicked. Because it ties everything together. And, eventually I'll get to a JFK episode. That's just a lot of information. And what I may do is just break it down to each theory. Like, is it this, is this? And then I'll let you guys decide on, what you guys believe on that. But that is how Charles Manson, is connected to the CIA and JFK. That's a lot of information. Like I said, you guys can go and look this up. Like I said, a lot of the information I got from, was, different articles. I think one was from, you can't always really trust Wikipedia, but, I did look at some stuff on there, but, there was a Coffee or Die magazine. I think another one was the Washington Post. So there's, like I said, all mainstream type articles. And then also too, you can also read Tom O'Neill's book, Chaos. It's crazy, man. You just truly, it's truly, baffling how, like, these topics and this information is not like public knowledge. And maybe that's why I'm here, guys. But I appreciate you guys listening to this episode. Eventually, like I said, we'll get to JFK. I know somebody was talking about the Bridgewater Triangle. And also, too, guys, on Spotify, I do have, like, questions of, like, what episode you guys want to hear. Also, I do polls on, like, what do you believe, or, like, what's, kind of gauges what's, kind of going on, like, in the episode. But if you do listen on Spotify, do that. Let me know what you want to hear next. I've hit like different kind of topics, and that's kind of like how this goes. I am working on, actively working on, This Is Creepy Part 2. That's where I tell stories from the listeners. So if you have a story, please reach out to me. A good way to get to me is yaholatiger@gmail.com. Send me an email. Be as descriptive as you can. Try to keep it in order. And I'll read that on the podcast. Also, too, you can get a hold of me on Facebook, Yahola Tiger. Send me a message. Let me know you listen to the podcast. And then TikTok, One Man Band 918. Twitter was the same, One Man Band 918. I'm trying to think of what else. Unsolved Mysteries of the Reservation. Go check that out. I know the latest episode just dropped on Friday. This is being recorded on the last day of April. So on this past Friday, go check that out, guys. I know the guys played a board game, which was kind of funny. Those guys, we always doing something kind of wild like that. But I appreciate you guys. If you're new, appreciate you listening in. And I appreciate everybody that listens, who's a regular listener. And I'll catch you on the next one.